Most people believe that their moral values are simply true, that good and evil are real categories that exist independently of any person or culture, that their sense of right and wrong is something they discovered rather than something they absorbed. Nietzsche spent an entire book dismantling that assumption, and the argument he makes is still one of the most unsettling in all of philosophy. Beyond Good and Evil was published in 1886, 2 years after Thus Spoke Zarathustra. If Zarathustra was Nietzsche's most poetic and visionary book, Beyond Good and Evil is his most precise and combative. He described it as a critique of modernity and a prelude to a philosophy of the future. It is organized into 9 parts covering philosophers, morality, religion, politics, and what a genuinely honest thinker looks like. Every section is designed to disturb comfortable assumptions. The title itself is a provocation. Beyond Good and Evil does not mean that nothing matters or that all actions are equally acceptable. It means that the particular moral framework built on the categories of good and evil is itself a historical construction, not a timeless truth, and that genuinely honest thinking requires getting above it to see where it came from and what purpose it serves. This is one of the most challenging ideas in Western philosophy, and also one of the most important. Nietzsche opens by attacking philosophers, including the great ones. He argues that every philosophical system is, at root, a disguised autobiography. Philosophers claim to be seeking objective truth, but what they are actually doing is constructing elaborate justifications for their own instincts, preferences, and psychology. They begin with their conclusion and work backward to premises. They call this rational inquiry, but it is mostly sophisticated self-expression. This is not a dismissal of philosophy. It is a call for honesty about what philosophy actually is. Nietzsche thought that a philosopher who admitted the personal, psychological roots of their thinking was more trustworthy than one who claimed detached objectivity. The pretense of pure reason is itself a kind of deception. To do real philosophy, you have to be willing to examine where your own certainties come from, and that requires courage most thinkers do not have. He applies this especially to the concept of truth itself. Most philosophers assume that truth is good and that we should pursue it at all costs. Nietzsche asks why. What if some truths are harmful? What if the drive toward truth is itself a kind of will to power in disguise, a need to dominate and organize reality? He does not conclude that truth is worthless. He insists that the value of truth should itself be examined, rather than assumed. If you are finding this valuable, subscribe to the channel. We are exploring the most challenging philosophical texts ever written and applying them honestly to modern thinking. Links to the full text of Beyond Good and Evil and more Nietzsche analysis are in the description below. The most influential part of the book is Nietzsche's analysis of 2 fundamentally different moral systems, which he calls master morality and slave morality. Master morality originates with strong, self-affirming people who define good as whatever they are and whatever they value. Their morality begins with a yes to themselves. Good means noble, powerful, excellent. Bad simply means weak, low, mediocre. There is no resentment in it, just self-assertion. Slave morality originates differently. It begins not with self-affirmation but with resentment toward those who are stronger. The slave says, the powerful are evil. And then, as the logical reversal concludes, therefore we, the powerless, are good. Slave morality creates its values reactively by negating what the master values. It makes virtue out of what was originally just weakness, turning patience into meekness, poverty into humility, inability into modesty. Nietzsche argues that modern Western morality is overwhelmingly of the slave type. What we call good meekness, self-denial, equality, pity, is largely a long victory of slave morality over master morality. This is not a celebration of cruelty. It is a historical observation. He is asking, where did your sense of what is virtuous come from? Who decided that? And does that origin affect whether the values are actually good? Against both master and slave morality, Nietzsche describes what he calls the free spirit. This is the person who has escaped the herd, who has examined the values they were given, and no longer simply accepts them because everyone else does. The free spirit does not rebel for the sake of rebellion. They examine honestly, including examining their own rebellions, and arrive at genuine independent judgment. The free spirit is not comfortable. They are willing to hold dangerous or unpopular ideas. They do not require the approval of the crowd to feel confident in their conclusions. They are skeptical of all systems, including the ones they find most appealing, because they know that every system tempts you to stop thinking, and the free spirit's primary commitment is to keep thinking, even when the conclusions are uncomfortable. Nietzsche was deeply suspicious of intellectual fashions and group consensus. He thought that most people who consider themselves freethinkers are actually just following a different herd, the herd of the educated progressive class, and congratulating themselves on their independence while being just as conformist as anyone else. Real independence of thought is genuinely rare, genuinely difficult, and genuinely costly. Most people are not willing to pay that price. One of the most intellectually interesting parts of Beyond Good and Evil is Nietzsche's examination of truth-seeking itself. He asks, why do we value truth? We simply assume that knowing the truth is better than not knowing it, that pursuing accuracy is obviously worthwhile. But is it? Nietzsche notes that we regularly prefer comfortable fictions to disturbing truths, and that this preference may actually be necessary for human life and sanity. He was one of the first philosophers to seriously investigate self-deception, not as a moral failure but as a psychological necessity. People deceive themselves about their own motivations, their own biases, their own role in their problems. This is not simply weakness, it is often a survival mechanism. The philosopher who insists on total transparency with themselves about everything may not be wiser, just more destabilized, but he ultimately argues for intellectual honesty over comfort. The free spirit must be willing to follow an argument wherever it leads, even into conclusions that are personally threatening or socially unpopular. Not because truth is always comfortable, but because building your life on illusions creates a fragile foundation. Sooner or later, reality corrects the record. Better to have faced it voluntarily. Think about how you respond when evidence contradicts something you strongly believe. Most people experience a brief flash of resistance, then find reasons why the evidence is wrong or irrelevant. Nietzsche would say that resistance is your will to power protecting your existing worldview. The free spirit notices the resistance, then examines the evidence anyway. This is one of the rarest and most difficult intellectual habits there is. Nietzsche was critical of Christianity not primarily on theological grounds but on psychological ones. He argued that Christianity institutionalized slave morality at a civilizational scale, teaching people to suppress their vital instincts, to distrust their own strength, and to find their highest value in self-denial and suffering. Whatever spiritual insight the religion may contain, its cultural effect, in his view, was to produce smaller, weaker, more self-doubting people. He was equally critical of democracy and egalitarianism, not because he wanted the poor to suffer, but because he saw the leveling impulse as an extension of slave morality into politics. The drive to make everyone equal, in his reading, was partly a drive to prevent anyone from being too much better than everyone else. The mediocrity of the many, organized politically, becomes a force against excellence. He found this as spiritually dangerous as any religious oppression. These are his most controversial positions, and they deserve honest engagement rather than either dismissal or uncritical acceptance. His concern was always with the conditions that allow exceptional human beings to develop. You may strongly disagree with his conclusions about democracy, but the underlying question, what kind of society produces genuinely excellent human beings, is an important one that most political theory does not address seriously. The book ends with Nietzsche's vision of what a future philosopher would look like. Not someone who systematizes knowledge into a tidy worldview, but someone who creates new values, who takes the task of evaluation seriously, who asks what kind of life and what kind of human being is worth affirming. The philosopher of the future is a legislator of values, not a scholar of existing ones. This vision is connected to everything else in the book. Once you accept that moral values are historical constructions rather than eternal truths, the question becomes, who decides what the next values will be? For Nietzsche, this is the highest philosophical task. Not analyzing existing frameworks but creating better ones, not inheriting a morality but choosing one, fully and honestly, after genuine examination. He writes beautifully about solitude as the natural home of this kind of thinker. The philosopher of the future does not need the approval of the crowd and does not seek it. They think in solitude, develop their ideas without the distorting pressure of social validation, and return to the world only when they have something genuinely worth saying. The need for constant social connection, in Nietzsche's view, is often a sign of insufficient inner resources. How do you apply beyond good and evil to your actual life? First, examine the origin of your moral certainties. Pick one thing you are absolutely certain is wrong, some behavior or attitude you find genuinely reprehensible. Now ask, where did that certainty come from? Was it reasoned independently? Was it absorbed from your family, culture, religion, or political tribe? This is not an invitation to abandon the belief. It is an invitation to own it deliberately rather than inherit it accidentally. Second, practice intellectual honesty about your own reasoning. When you make an argument, ask, am I starting from evidence and following it to a conclusion? Or am I starting from a conclusion I already hold and finding evidence to support it? Most people do the second while believing they are doing the first. The gap between these two processes is where most intellectual self-deception lives. Third, identify where you are following the herd without knowing it. What opinions do you hold primarily because everyone in your social circle holds them? What positions would embarrass you to question aloud? Not because the questioning is logically wrong, but because it would mark you as someone who does not belong. Those are the positions most worth examining. The beliefs you cannot afford to question are the ones with the most power over you. And fourth, take seriously the question of what you actually value, not what you are supposed to value. If you stripped away all external expectation and social pressure, what would you genuinely affirm? What kind of life seems worth living to you, in your own honest assessment? This is the question Nietzsche most wanted people to sit with. Most people have never asked it without the noise of other people's expectations drowning out the answer. It is important to say clearly what beyond good and evil is not. It is not a defense of cruelty, exploitation, or indifference to suffering. Nietzsche's criticism of slave morality is not a celebration of the powerful trampling the weak. His target is always the psychological condition of suppression, resentment, and self-deception, whether found in the powerful or the powerless. He wanted people to be genuinely more alive, not more ruthless. The book rewards multiple readings because Nietzsche writes in aphorisms, short, dense observations rather than extended arguments. Each one contains more than it appears to at first. He is also deliberately provocative in ways that are designed to make you argue back, which is part of the point. If you read Beyond Good and Evil and simply agree with everything, you have probably missed it. If you finish it genuinely unsettled, you have probably understood it. Beyond Good and Evil does not tell you what to believe. It asks whether you have ever genuinely examined what you believe and why. It asks whether your moral certainties are the result of honest inquiry or inherited convention. It asks whether you are a thinker or a member of a herd. And it suggests that the person willing to ask those questions honestly and sit with the uncomfortable answers is doing something rarer and more important than most philosophical work. Tomorrow, I will distill Nietzsche's sharpest challenge from this book into one 60-second question. This video was created by combining human research and script writing with AI-assisted visuals and production. For the full text and more analysis, check the links in the description below.